Welcome to another bite-sized marketing chat with me, Miles from Miles Marketing. And this week, as you can see, we have got Can You Afford Radio Advertising? Okay, so let's dive straight into it. Any comments, any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will do my very best to answer them. So, can you afford radio advertising? I'm going to say that for the average medium-sized business, yes, indeed you can. But firstly, I really want to make it very, very clear that I would only suggest using radio advertising as a tool as part of a wider marketing campaign. If you go down the road and you find out that you do have, let's say, £10,000 in your budget, and you can just about afford to produce a radio advert and buy spots on radio, but you can't do anything else around marketing because you've spent all your budget, then I would say no. All right. Radio advertising is not for you. It needs to be part of a rounder marketing exercise. So don't just blow the budget on this as one item. It will not work. Okay, let me just tell you that. I think that in terms of broad strategy, always use a specialist to do the production of your radio advert and to buy the airtime for you, to buy those spots. Okay, they know what they're doing. So use a specialist. But as you know, with me, I like to sort of keep things punchy and give you some practical advice. So what is first? The very first thing that you should be thinking about if you're considering using radio as a medium is, does your target market reside there? All right. Do they consume radio? This harks back to making sure that you've identified a clear target market. And if you market to everybody, or if everybody is your customer, narrow it down to a specific section of the majority of your customers. So do the majority of your customers listen to radio? Then you need to decide, do they listen to local radio? Do they listen to a regional radio? Or do they listen to a national radio? Because those are like the three main options that are available to you. And there's a sliding scale in terms of price. And we'll come on to price in a minute. So you need to think about radio advertising as being a long-term investment in your brand. Just being able to afford a 1 month, right? 1 month worth of spots on your local radio is not going to do you any good. All right. What you need to be front of mind regularly and often. If you're going to be advertising on radio, it is likely that you've got probably a service which people are going to buy into. It's going to be a product or a service, but not everybody is going to be ready for that product and service at the particular time that they may hear you. So by buying the ad space across months, not weeks, will give you some longevity in terms of people hearing it, getting familiarized with your brand, and maybe at the time they hear your advert, they may well be ready to engage. So think about this across months, not weeks. But what's involved, Miles, in producing a radio advert? Well, perhaps not as much as a TV advert, but there's still lots of things to get done. So the main thing is the creative input. And what you're really looking to do is you're looking to invest in the production of your radio ad. That's one bit. And then the second part is buying the airspace or the ad space, all right, in order to broadcast it. So first of all, think about the production. This is where you need to get a creative agency involved because they're going to come up with some ideas based around your key products and services, your USP, taking in your brand values and your tone of voice and using all of that stuff properly. But ultimately, you need to come up with some detailed messaging that points to what you're trying to sell or what you're trying to make people aware of. You need to think about maybe a jingle. Obviously, this is an audio only medium, so think about a jingle. Jingles can be extremely sticky. You can sort of be humming away to a jingle even after just a couple of times hearing it. And also thinking about using a voiceover, maybe you can afford the tens of thousands of pounds for a famous voice, but there are loads of professional voiceovers out there who can actually lend themselves really well to your company and your tone of voice. And I'll come on to that in a second. So think about production and then think about the airtime costs of booking the slots. But what can you expect in terms of costs? Before we go into that, there will be some regulations that you need to jump through. So every broadcaster will have their Ofcom regulations that you will need to make sure that your ad subscribes to, right, or upholds. So it'll be the radio station that holds the Ofcom license, and they will need to make sure that your ads conform to that. So once you've produced your advert, you need to submit it to them for approval. They'll help you with that process just to make sure that it is not in breach of any of their licenses. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Right. What's it going to cost? Well, creative, all right, so coming up with the ideas, I'm going to say that for the average customer, in terms of the average campaign, you're going to be looking at, 1,500 quid, a couple of grand really to come up with a concept. What I'm going to say here is this. Normally, radio advertising would be part of a wider marketing campaign. So in my opinion, you probably will have this bundled in with your overall creative. So, a company will come to you, they'll probably charge you, 5, 7, 8 grand, 10 grand, depending on the size of the campaign, to come up with an overall concept for the campaign. But that will include all of your medium. All right. It may be sort of in-shop point of sale, or it'll be websites, or it'll be social media, or it'll be emails, and it'll be the radio advertising. All right. So maybe the concept will already be there. But, if it's going to be standalone, then you're looking at probably 1,500 quid or so. It varies widely, right? But this is a good place to start. In terms of music, you're going to have to put some music on top, be it people singing a jingle or some background ambience. Maybe you've got sort of sound effects that you need to put on. I would say possibly around about the £1,000 mark, maybe a little bit less. Most of the money is in the production. If you want to use a well-known tune, you will have to pay royalties. So a very common way of getting around this is using a pastiche. There's very specific, very specific things around what is a pastiche of a popular song. It's all about how many notes are similar in a row, that kind of stuff. But again, an agency would be able to take you through that. You should think about voiceover as well. Using a voiceover artist, I'm going to say between like sort of 300 to 800 to £1,000, all depending on how much work they need to do and how long your campaign is. Sometimes you can buy out the rights to use their voice forever. Sometimes a voiceover will say, well, no, I'll sell you my rights for a 6-month period, and after that we need to renew it if you are going to continue on to use my voice. All right, so all things to consider. Pre-production, like the overall pre-production, I'm going to say between £3,000 and £5,000 for all of the things I've just talked about to get you an advert that would be ready to go on air. Now, in terms of buying the airtime, I'm going to base these figures on roughly a week-long campaign with 30-second slots. But what you may well do within your campaign is have a 30-second larger slot, and then you might chunk down your 30-second into I don't know, 10-second bumpers or two 15-second different mixes, right? Just to mix it up so it's along the same theme, but perhaps you're saying something different. So for a week-long 30-second spot for local radio, remember we spoke about local, regional, national. For a local radio station, I don't know, between £500 to £800 for enough spots to get you across the platform for a week. With regional, probably in the region of £2,000 to £2,500 to £3,000 for the same amount of airtime. And then national, I think you're looking at quite large numbers, maybe it's sort of, 8 to 10,000. But all these things are negotiable, right? Never sort of take the first price. And this is where I would recommend using a creative agency or specifically using a media buyer who's going to get you best bang for their buck because they know how to negotiate with these people. All right. So, once it's produced, then you can reuse it across a period. And I would say that your investment should be maybe like about £1,000 a month as a minimum for at least 6 months. So think about that extended investment so that people do hear you regularly and often. So I'm going to say across a 6-month period, if you look at production and airtime costs, you're talking about an investment of around about £1,000, £1,200. You can go silly with it, right? But I think that you can do things on a budget, especially if you are very descriptive about what it is that you want. Yeah, so I'm going to say that's reasonably affordable for the vast majority of, you'll call them small companies, but companies that turn over, £1, £2, £3 to £5 million, and certainly that sort of £10 to £50 million turnover companies, they will be able to afford radio advertising. It can be very effective, but only if your target market are there. So here are my top tips in terms of can you afford radio advertising. Tip number 1 is only use radio advertising if your target market are listening. All right, don't do it if you try to appeal to like Gen Z and they're not listening to the radio station, then don't spend your money on it. Do it only as part of a wider campaign. It needs to have impact where people see you across multiple platforms. We want them to hear you on the radio. We want something to fall through the letterbox. We want something to land in their email. They want to see you on social media. See you in the local paper, all of that sort of fun stuff. Make sure it's all tied up in a wider campaign. Use a professional, right? Use a professional to guide you, someone like myself who could manage this for you, or use a specific creative agency that are used to working with radio. Don't just go to a creative agency that have no experience working with radio, and make sure you ask the relevant questions like, are you using a media buyer? Have you made sure that this all complies to the Ofcom regulations? Okay. What about if you can't afford it, right? It may well be that you can't afford this sort of level, but you can still get yourself on radio. We spoke about this a little while ago with Justin Moy, where he was the mortgage market has been in turmoil, and he's got on the front foot and started putting himself out there and creating PR. And now the radio stations are ringing him for comment on the mortgage sort of crisis. So you can become an authority in your marketplace, and you can get on radio through active PR. Okay, so there we go. I hope you have found this useful. If you have any specific questions about advertising on radio, then please get in touch. There's my number. And yeah, ask those questions and I will try my very best to answer them. So until next time, and we meet again, ta-ta for now.